I enjoy things I remember. Hey there, how you doing? I'm TechDweeb, welcome. Thanks for clicking on the video today. Anbernic got bored. For the longest time, they've made rectangle-shaped handhelds, all different shapes of rectangles all the time, but they got tired of doing the same old rectangles. And lately, they've been mixing it up. And now we get this, the RG Arc. And it's obviously inspired by the Sega controllers, Sega Genesis or MegaDrive, but also Sega Saturn. I didn't have a Sega Genesis when I was a kid, but my friend did, and I played a ton of Sega over at her place. So I have some second-hand Sega nostalgia to recapture with this thing. We'll get into the build and the system and the gaming in a bit, but let's just take a moment to appreciate where we are in the handheld world. We are getting such unique handhelds, perfect handhelds for so many systems. And now Sega is getting some love, finally. Like I said, I didn't have a Sega, but I played quite a bit of it. And since then, I've gotten into emulation and I've really come to appreciate Sega games. Not just Sega Genesis, but the older Master System and especially the Sega Saturn. And on paper, the RG Arc seems like it'll be the perfect handheld for everything Sega. It plays Master System, Genesis or MegaDrive, and Saturn and Dreamcast, and it looks the part too. So it's perfect, right? Well, maybe. Hey Kat, wanna come over and play Nintendo?
No.
Oh, okay. See you later, I guess.
Shut up, dweeb. I mean, no, get in here. I have something to show you.
Okay.
Check this out.
Oh my god. Is that a Sega Genesis?
Yeah, my dad got it for me.
Wow. Can we?
Yep.
The RG Arc comes in two models. The Arc S, which is the budget model, it comes in transparent black and blue options, and the Arc D, the slightly higher end model. And it has Sega Genesis black and the Japanese Saturn beige options. All of the models use the RK3566 processor, which is used by a ton of handhelds, so there won't be any big surprises with the performance here. The Arc S has 1 GB of RAM and only has Linux as the operating system and no touchscreen. And the Arc D has 2 GB of RAM and has Linux or Android as the operating system. And it has a touchscreen. Realistically, they'll both play the same stuff with the same performance, more or less. It really just comes down to which OS you prefer, or which color scheme you like better. Both models have a nice big 4-inch screen, 640 by 480 resolution, and it's a very nice screen. Also, dual front-facing stereo speakers, built-in dual-band Wi-Fi, and Bluetooth 4.2, and a 3500 mAh battery. We also have an HDMI port so you can plug it into your TV or a computer monitor, connect up some USB controllers via the OTG port or Bluetooth controllers, and use it as a home console. The controls on the RG Arc are super interesting. Obviously, they're going for the Sega vibe. Same shape and D-pad and button layout style as the retro Sega controllers. You might have noticed that we do not have an analog stick, just one single D-pad. Very cool feeling to this D-pad. I'm a big fan. The whole thing pivots as a single disc and there's lots of travel. It's much easier to rotate and pivot the D-pad with this shape, which makes it amazing for fighting games. I'm not good at this sort of thing, but even I had no problem pulling off Hadoukens and Shoryukens as if I was a pro like Retro Game Corps. But even just as a regular D-pad for all sorts of games, I absolutely love playing on here. It's very different from what I'm used to, and that means it's unique feeling, and that's appealing to me. And of course, these buttons are another unique thing about this thing. We have a 6-button layout, which fighting game fans are gonna love. These 3 lower buttons are very big compared to the top 3 buttons. They're all very comfortable to use, but the difference in size and the fact that the lower buttons are concave while the upper buttons are convex really took me by surprise. And just like the D-pad, I like playing games on this thing because it's a novel experience and everything controls so well. I gotta say, I was skeptical when I first saw this thing. I didn't think I'd like it, but it has quickly won me over. I love gaming on the Arc, not just because of the Sega nostalgia, but because it's so comfortable in general. The controls aren't the only thing screaming Sega about the RG Arc. Sega! The shape and the colors really seal the deal. The shape should immediately remind any Sega kid of Genesis or Saturn controller shapes. And obviously the different colors are perfectly nostalgic for those systems. It's a really big handheld, so it loses points in the pocket factor, but it totally makes up for that in terms of comfort. This thing really fills out your hands, and it's not heavy, and that coupled with the big 4-inch screen means that it's just a comfortable handheld to game on. I've had a great time testing games on this thing mostly because of the size of it. It feels great. And the screen is good. I like the screen. It's big and it's good. I think it's pronounced Chaos. Those are Chaos Emeralds.
No, my cousin is way older than us, and she's super smart, and she said it was pronounced Chahos Emeralds.
Yeah, but just because your cousin is older doesn't mean she's right.
Well, I don't care. She's smarter than you, and she said it was Chahos, and that's what I'm gonna say. This is Sonic Chahos, and those are Chahos Emeralds.
Okay, that's cool. That's cool. Hey, Kat.
What?
Do you want to be my girlfriend?
Yeah, sure. Why not?
Awesome. Can I have a turn soon?
No.
The Arc S comes with a Linux operating system, and the Arc D comes with both Linux and Android. They both have the same Linux, so let's start there. Anbernic has built a custom Linux system here this time, and from what I've heard, it's not likely that we're gonna get custom firmware for this thing, which is a bummer, but at least what we have here is serviceable. In the main menu, you'll have an apps section, which just has some advanced settings. The games are divided into two sections. We have emulators, which is for standalone emulators for higher end systems like Nintendo 64 or Saturn or PSP. And then RetroArch is for every system that can be run through RetroArch. So all the older stuff like Super Nintendo, Sega, Game Boy Advance, arcade games. And we have a favorites menu and a recents list. You can also press start to open up the system settings where you can connect to Wi-Fi. And this would be for retro achievements. We do not get the standard emulation station themes, nor do we get box art scraping. So if you want to replace the games or add your own games, which you probably will because these game lists are kinda crappy, then you'll need to do your own box art scraping on your computer. We do get some important features like the ability to set options for the games to change the ratio, turn on shaders, integer scaling, autosave and load state. So that's Linux, but on the Arc D we get Android. So you could boot into Android by holding the function button during startup, and then you'll be in Android. And it's a very standard kind of basic version of Android. The same OS that we get on Anbernic's other RK3566 devices like the RG353V. No Google Play services, so you'll need to sideload everything that you want. We do get a touchscreen, which is good for Android navigation, and if you swipe down from the top, Anbernic has this game mode, which is their built-in emulation front end. And in here, it's a pretty standard emulation front-end experience. Everything works pretty good. A few different hotkeys than you have on Linux, but for the most part, it works and it's a fine experience. However, I personally don't bother with the Android side. Everything I want to do, I can do in Linux. It's simpler, it's more seamless. There are very slight differences in performance and compatibility between Linux and Android, but barely any at all, to be honest. So in that regard, I'll tell you right now that you shouldn't feel like you need to pay extra for the Arc D to get that extra 1 GB of RAM in Android. Oh, hey, look at that bug.
Yeah.
Oh, there it goes.
Bye, bug.
Yeah. Hey, Kat, could we hold hands?
No, I don't really like holding hands.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's fine.
Hey, remember that bug?
Yeah. The RK3566 processor that we have in the Arc is a tried and tested chip. It's the same chip that's in a ton of these things. And the performance is going to be the same here as on any of those. You can play everything up to PS1 with no issue at all, and you'll get most Nintendo 64, most Dreamcast, and most PSP. The problem with the higher end stuff is that we do not have an analog stick. Most of the time you can rebind the D-pad to act as a stick, but lots of games require analog sticks and D-pad. And those games will not be playable on here. So this definitely isn't a one-size-fits-all device. It's highly specific. That said, the vast majority of retro systems do play fine on here, and the experience of gaming on the Arc is great. It's just a comfortable device with a nice big screen, a big chassis with nice ergonomics, and that floating D-pad and the 6-button controls lends itself well to retro games, but especially fighting games. I'm not big into fighting games, but even for me, I had fun playing these games on here. But if you're really into the idea of the RG Arc, it's probably because you are yearning for that Sega nostalgia. So let's do a tour of all the Sega systems and see what sort of experience you're gonna get. So we'll start with Master System, I suppose. I guess this is a good time to point out that the games lists are typical Anbernic garbage. Only some of the games have box art scraped, and some of the games have numbers in front of the names that puts the games in an awkward order. Come on, Anbernic. Is it really so hard to give us a good ROM set? Nobody likes it like this. But I digress. Sega Master System is good to go. It looks great and it plays great, obviously. Let's move on to Game Gear. This thing is basically the Game Gear of your dreams because it's a portable Sega that plays all the retro Sega games. I don't particularly think Game Gear games are really worth playing in 2023, but they play great on here, and it has a cool Game Gear bezel if you're into that sort of thing. Sega Genesis or MegaDrive is probably the most ideal system for this device. Every single Genesis game is going to play great on here. The controls are tight, the performance is perfect, and because we're on a 640 by 480 screen, that means that we get pixel perfect Genesis integer scaling. And it's a big, beautiful 4-inch screen, so these games have never looked better or played better than they do on the Arc. If you have that Sega Genesis nostalgia itch to scratch, this is it. This is the one. Buy this and never look back. Then we have Sega Saturn. Okay, it only came with 4 dumb Saturn games, so I scrapped those and put my own games on here. Not every game works, but I found that sometimes a different version of the game will work. For example, Nights into Dreams here. I couldn't get the CHD version of that game to work, but I downloaded the bin and Q versions of the game and it did work. And there were a few other games that I found like that. So make sure you try both types of files if there's a specific game that you want to get working. However, there will still be games that straight up don't work. I'd say maybe 10% to 20% of the games just won't launch at all. Also, a couple of the games that didn't work on the Linux emulator did work on the Android version. So it's not like you can't play Saturn games on this thing. All of my favorite Sega Saturn games ran fine. I mean, if you want a 100% perfect Saturn emulation experience, you're not going to get that here. But if you just want to play a bunch of Saturn games, then yeah, you could do that on the Arc and have a great time. And it feels authentic because the device itself feels like a portable Sega Saturn. And the last Sega system that you're gonna want to know about is Dreamcast. Dreamcast had an analog stick, so there will be Dreamcast games that don't work. This chipset can't handle perfect 100% Dreamcast emulation either, so some games that do work won't have the best performance. I'd say maybe 75% of the Dreamcast games will work well on here, but ultimately maybe only like 50% of the games will actually be playable because of the D-pad only design of the Arc. For example, Soul Calibur worked great. Great performance, no issues with the D-pad. Sonic Adventure 2 worked okay, however the D-pad didn't work to control the character. And then when I went in to rebind the D-pad as the analog stick, it stopped working in the menus. So it's a no-go. That's one game that you won't be playing. It's a shame because this is the last Sega system. If we could just get good Dreamcast, then we'd be all set with this device. As it is, you can play a lot, just not everything, and that's a bummer. The Super Nintendo version is great, but the Sega version is just better.
Yeah?
Yeah, totally. You can't be a Velociraptor on the Super Nintendo version, but the Sega version you can be the Velociraptor.
Uh-huh.
The Sega version also has better graphics.
You think so?
Yeah, I think so. Have you seen the Velociraptors in Jurassic Park? The Sega version looks almost exactly like the movie.
Okay.
Velociraptors are my favorite dinosaur.
Oh yeah?
Yep. Oh, wow.
Shut up.
So, do I like the RG Arc and do I recommend it? Is the question you're probably asking, and I'm probably going to answer it now. Yeah, I really like it. If this is your first and only handheld, I'd say pass on this and get something more full-featured with an analog stick. But if you have other handhelds and are looking for something unique, then the Arc is definitely that. I love gaming on this thing. If you're into fighting games, this is a no-brainer. There is no better fighting game handheld out there, period. But if you're craving that Sega nostalgia, something to bring you back to a simpler time, the good old days of playing Sonic Chaos with your best friend before life got all confusing and difficult on a device that feels like an actual Sega controller, then the RG Arc is a special device. You know, in a world of retro handhelds that all feel basically the same, the RG Arc doesn't. And hats off to Anbernic for trying something new. I'm here for it. And Go Game Geek is here for you if you want to buy one. I'll include a link to where you can buy this on their store in the description below if you want to pick one up. And that brings us to the end. Let me know what you think of the RG Arc. And I don't like to ask over and over, but please subscribe if you haven't yet. It helps out the channel, and you don't want to miss any of my videos, do you? No, you don't. So subscribe. Come on now. That's it for me. I'm TechDweeb. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.